Hi folks, how you doing? It's James, JT at the Movies, back here again in my movie space and joined again by my lovely girlfriend Laura.
Hello.
So today is the first instalment of our Star Wars review series. Originally I'd hoped to bring you a video on each of the films in the series, that's the 9 episodic films and then the 3 spin-offs that have been released as well, Rogue One, Solo and the theatrically released Clone Wars movie. And what we thought would be a really good idea would actually be to take sort of like the 3 trilogies, if you like, the originals, the prequels and the sequels, and then the 3 movies that are spin-offs and do 4 videos on them talking about the trilogies as a whole. Because everybody who's probably going to be watching these videos knows the story of Star Wars, they know the intricacies of the plots, and so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the actual plots and what goes on here, but more our thoughts as we watch them this time. Anyway, it's been like coming into it as a new experience for Laura, and it's been nice for me to revisit them again after probably a couple of years away, apart from the newest one at this point. So today's video we're going to talk about the prequel trilogy as a bit of a whole, and just obviously a quick recap. In episode 1 our Jedi Masters Qui-Gon Jinn and a very young Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi stranded on Tatooine. They find the young boy Anakin Skywalker, who is incredibly strong with the Force and is a really happy-go-lucky kid. Alongside the journey that they're on in the film, they decide to bring Anakin along with them and train him because they believe that he is the prophesied Jedi that will bring balance to the Force. Attack of the Clones, we catch up with our heroes 10 years later. Anakin is now being trained by Obi-Wan. They've become very close, they're like brothers. Anakin's very hot-headed and thinks that things should be done his way, and Obi-Wan is quite right and quite wise to remind him that actually patience is a virtue and that he should continue on with his studies and his training, and that he is ultimately on this path to becoming the chosen one. It's in that film that the romance with Padme, which is sort of hinted at in the first film, that he's infatuated with her as a little boy, but in this film it's sort of built upon a little bit more, and by the end of the film they are in a fully fledged relationship. The third film is about Anakin's descent and turn to the dark side. Anakin begins having visions and dreams that Padme is going to die in the birth of their child that nobody knows that they're actually having, and becomes seduced by Darth Sidious, who of course we all know from the original trilogy is Emperor Palpatine, but obviously that reveal isn't really made in the trilogy, in the prequel trilogy that is, and you sort of have to play along with it. He's seduced by the Emperor's sort of offer to be able to teach him how to stop death and save his loved ones, and sort of becomes enticed from that. He also becomes disillusioned with the Jedi as the Emperor begins to poison his mind. This leads to Anakin betraying the Jedi Order, killing Jedi younglings, killing Mace Windu, and ultimately getting into a battle on Mustafar with Obi-Wan Kenobi, a battle to almost the death, where Obi-Wan obviously famously wins with the high ground and leaves him for dead. The Emperor comes to rescue what's left of Anakin Skywalker, now Darth Vader, and obviously reconstructs him with robotic limbs and the very famous life support suit. And then it sort of ends there, and obviously that's where 20 years later or whatever it would be, Star Wars, the original film, would pick up. So I do actually like these films, and don't get me wrong, they have their flaws. They really have their flaws. As a kid, I loved episode 1. When episode 1 came out on VHS, that's about the time I found Star Wars. I remember Dad renting that one for me, taping it off the telly for me when it was on, before collecting all of this happened, and I remember buying it and enjoying it, and then I remember finding the original trilogy in the little gold video box set that I'm sure every Star Wars fan out there had, the 97 edition ones. I remember finding that in a charity shop for like £3 or something like that, and wearing those tapes out. So I absolutely have always adored Star Wars, and always have a soft spot for Phantom Menace. Attack of the Clones, you might kill me, but it's actually my favourite of the prequels. Don't get me wrong, it has its problems. I know it's got its problems. Some of the acting is beyond dire, but there's just something about the story that really endears itself to me. I really, really enjoy the action and the whole bit with Count Dooku. I find him a really interesting and compelling villain, and I kind of wish that they'd done more with him, and maybe even have done something with him and Darth Maul leading up to the Emperor. Episode 3 is my least favourite of them. Now, don't get me wrong, it's got some absolutely fantastic scenes in it. The Mustafar fight at the end is breathtaking. John Williams' score, obviously, throughout is great. But there's just so many bits in it that just don't feel right. And Anakin's sort of descent into, you know, being one of the most, yes, conflicted but evil beings in the whole of the galaxy just feels more like a whiny kid not getting their way. And while that, for me, sort of worked in Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, it really just didn't hold any water in Episode 3, because at this point he's supposed to be a few years on again, and, you know, that he's supposed to have that level of maturity about him. But enough of my thoughts. Laura, what did you think of this trilogy as a whole?
I liked it. I really enjoyed watching them. Yeah. As James was saying, I've not seen this film since I was about 8, and I clearly don't remember as much as I've seen now. But I liked it. The storyline from Anakin going into Darth Vader, I really liked watching that, because you can really see the main points of his spiral into working for the Sith, and how Emperor Palpatine sort of manipulates him, giving him all these promises that he was going to be a big leader, that he was going to rule the Sith Empire and all of that. You can really see how effective they've made that look.
Yeah, he sort of like, he sows the seeds, doesn't he? Right from Episode 1, because he's, you know, we're going to see lots of you, young Skywalker. We'll be watching you with great promise, and you know, and then at the end of Episode 2, obviously. No, sorry, at the end of Episode 2, the beginning of Episode 3, Count Dooku's killed off, and you know, the Emperor's very much kill him, and it you know, it sort of influences Anakin, doesn't he, to murder him, where it's not the Jedi way. They bring him in for trial, and that's what they do. And you can see sort of how the Emperor sort of pulled the strings and manipulated the whole thing behind the scenes, and we sort of, I don't think we've mentioned the politics of the whole thing yet, but George Lucas sort of introduced politics into the prequel trilogy, whereas in the original trilogy it wasn't really a big thing. But, you know, throughout this we're talking about sort of elected senators and trade negotiations and all this sort of stuff, and there's scenes that's like watching, you know, Prime Minister's Question Time, you know, in the middle of Star Wars films. I don't speak for all Star Wars fans, but it's certainly not what I really ever wanted to see in my Star Wars films. And I always found those scenes as a kid to be the boring ones. You know, and as an adult, I find them just to be sort of maybe misplaced. But you know, that's something I don't particularly like about the prequel sort of thing. I really liked the action though in them.
Yeah.
You know, I found things like Jar Jar Binks in Episode 1. You know, the comic relief that George Lucas tries to put into these films doesn't work. The slapstick
comedy, yeah.
You know,
it was funny at the start to begin with, but it got embarrassing.
Jar Jar should have been like a throwaway character. You know, the whole scene in the Gungan sort of jungle, it should have ended there with him sort of pointing them on their way, and they go, "Thank you very much, never to be seen again." But he sort of becomes along and sort of almost becomes this integral part of the plot, and I never quite got that. I'm really glad that they didn't use him as much in the sequels.
Yeah. I think the one thing I liked is how Luke and Leia's story began. Because the one thing I do remember about watching them when I was younger was, if they're brother and sister, why is he in this sort of lifestyle and she's, where she is and what she's doing? How come they're not of the same lifestyle? Do you know what I mean? So it was nice to see, obviously it's never nice when siblings have to be separated, but it was nice to see how that began, because that is something I did wonder.
Sort of gives it the backstory, doesn't it? It sort of explains why they were separate. I suppose the original trilogy, which we'll watch soon enough, explains it in more detail. Obviously, as it becomes known that Darth Vader is their father, they want the kids hidden. I always found it baffling that they took... I can't remember who said this, but it's a really fair point. They took Luke back to the house that Anakin's mother died, lived in until she died, where his half brother lives, and that Luke's kept the surname of Skywalker. He's working for the all powerful Empire, and they can see every corner and nook and cranny of the galaxy. But that's that's just an aside for I'm sure that this wasn't planned out as a 9-story arc.
I don't think they were
episodic sort of feat of cinema when it was done. I think that what George Lucas set out to achieve with the prequels, I think he wanted to obviously tell the story of, like you say, how Darth Vader came to be, and sort of what came before. And while I like the films, I do think that some of the mystery should have been left intact, and I think that what also lets some of this stuff down is the fact that it answers questions that we didn't need answering, and it's really the question of did we need these films? But then you can say the same about the spin-offs and the sequels, and it's that sort of thing. I think on the whole, I do enjoy the series. The prequels of the series.
I've liked what I've seen so far, yeah.
I think some of the acting's wooden, I think some of the dialogue's ropey, but on the whole, I can enjoy them when I watch them, and I'm certainly not one of these fans that sort of has this sort of pure hatred for them, and that would swear that they're the devil's work. I certainly don't think that. They're very flawed movies, but so are the sequels as well. And to be fair, the original trilogy has its problems as well, doesn't it? None of these are perfect movies, but they're very enjoyable, and I think if we take them at face value, or at least this is how I see it, and just go into them wanting a fun adventure, that's exactly what you get. I'd probably say that I'd give episode 1 a 7 out of 10. I'd probably give episode 2 a 7 out of 10. Different reasoning behind that, though. Probably more nostalgia for episode 1, and more I feel that the story was more interesting for me, and I liked where it went in episode 2. And I'd give episode 3 a 6.5. There's some, like I said, there's some absolute pockets of magic in there, but I just think that the whole thing just didn't quite come together for me. Do you know what I think might have saved episode 3, Laura?
Go on.
I think if they'd have recast Hayden Christensen, because obviously they had Jake Lloyd in number 1 as Anakin, as like 10-year-old Anakin.
Yeah.
And then as 20-year-old Anakin, they got Hayden Christensen. If they recast an actor that was, say, in their late 30s or something like that, which I think is roughly about what Darth Vader was supposed to have been when he sort of turned to the dark side. If you go by the actor that was used in the original trilogy before they superimposed Hayden Christensen, I think that could have worked. Maybe that actor could have brought some more sort of weight to the performance, and it might have sort of lifted it up a little bit. But obviously, it's 20 years after the first one, 15 years after the last one, so it's an irrelevant gripe at this point. What would you rate the 3 films?
I'd give the first one, I'd give it a 7.5. I'd give the second one a 7, and then the third one a 6.
Fair enough. Any final thoughts on the prequel trilogy as a whole, though?
I think honestly, just seeing these films, because these are meant to be based right back at the start. I know they weren't released that way, but seeing them and then seeing how far the movies have come throughout the years, it's just amazing to look at. Yeah, did George Lucas plan to have all of these movies come out? Yeah.
I think there were some things that he had planned back in 1977 when he wrote the first Star Wars story. There were bits that he had planned, sort of like how the Emperor would turn Anakin and things like that, and just how it would all come to be. I don't think was fully fleshed out, but there were certainly bullet points, if you like, of this is where the stories come from. And
how much of a following these movies have now. Yeah,
it's amazing, the fan base. I adore these movies, and I'm grateful that we've got them, the whole series. But yeah, obviously, like I say, the prequel trilogy, it's not perfect, it's flawed in places, but there are, like I just said, some pockets of really, really good stuff in there. So yeah, this has been a bit of a rambling, a bit of a discussion on the prequel trilogy. And we'll obviously see you next time when we look at the original trilogy. Thank you very much for watching, folks. If you've liked this video and you want to see more videos talking about film series, doing film reviews, collecting physical media, as you can see here, I've quite the collection of DVDs, Blu-rays, 4Ks behind me. Please think about subscribing to the channel. It really means a lot, helps the channel to grow. Leave a comment with your own thoughts about these movies and Star Wars in general below. I'll be really interested to talk about it. Star Wars, as you can probably tell, is one of my passions. Folks, please remember to stay safe, stay well, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you again soon. Cheers.